What's going on, everybody? My name is Mark and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel for the first time. Now if you clicked into this video, then today you get to see me 3D print and process another wonderful helmet that can be found on Colts 3D. Today's model comes from Cracker's 3D40, which notably has designed other models like Kylo Ren and Darth Revan helmets, also a Dr. Doom mask and a wearable Iron Man chest plate. Most notably, everything on this designer's Colts 3D profile is absolutely free. Shifting focus to the print itself, you'll notice that this model was printed upside down and truthfully printed at 85% of its original size. I only wanted this as a decorative wall prop, and the original size of the model was too large to fit on my Ender 3 Max to be able to print as one solid piece. If it helps, it fits my wife's head perfectly. I did end up with a layer gap near the bottom of the helmet, but that was due to a filament roll change near the end of the print and some clearly needed printer maintenance. To kick things off, I started by sanding down the entire model with 80 grit sandpaper, as I always do. Although layer lines may still be visible at this point, they'll later be filled in with a combination of filler primer and glazing spot putty. And when it comes to spraying filler primer, applying it liberally on something as rounded and easily sandable as this has the official Mark Dubs seal of approval. So even if you end up with paint runs, you can rest assured knowing that everything that you cake onto the helmet can always be sanded back down again. Speaking of caking on additional materials, since the model was printed upside down, the top of the helmet required some very apparent and much needed smoothing. Most of the imperfections on the top of the helmet were pretty deep, so I used BONDO body filler to fill in these indentions. Also, if you ever work with either BONDO body filler or glazing spot putty, do keep in mind that these putties are carcinogenic, so be sure to wear proper breathing protection, as well as nitrile gloves to avoid skin contact. It's also recommended to always work with these materials in a well-ventilated area, as they do put off vapors that should not be inhaled. One notable thing that I can say about glazing spot putty is the rather fast curing time. Typically, it can take about 30 to 45 minutes for it to cure. You'll notice that when you do make the transition from 80 grit to 320 grit, that the sheer amount of elbow grease needed to sand is significantly reduced, meaning that the worst is behind you. This, however, is when we also find ourselves in a potentially indefinite cycle of spraying, puttying, and sanding in an effort to fill in every last, seemingly noticeable imperfection, which to a certain degree is perfectly fine. But try to keep in mind that small nicks and scratches can be worked into the finished product and sold off as battle damage, and nobody would ever know the difference. Typically, I repeat this process at least 2 or 3 times, and anything else that gets missed is worked into the final product. But also, like I said, most of what is left behind consists of small nicks and scratches. What's convenient about all of this talk is that the plan for this project is actually to be a battle-damaged helmet. So, leaving behind imperfections of that degree would only contribute towards adding an additional layer of detail to the final product. Duly, I'll note that for the convenience of the audience, specifically anyone wanting to achieve an unscathed, pristine look, this video still walks you up to that point as well. Moving forward, when you're ready to break what I like to call the cycle of perfection, the helmet can be sprayed down with gloss black spray paint. Once this dries, you should be able to identify pretty easily where the scratches left behind by 320 grit sandpaper are located. At this point, I recommend moving up the ladder and sanding with 600 grit sandpaper. Upon using such a higher grit of sandpaper from 320 grit, you'll notice that the surface of the helmet becomes exceptionally smooth in comparison to how it felt previously. When you decide to move to metallics, remember to wipe down the helmet with a damp cloth and dry thoroughly to try to rid your model of residual dust. This is a good way to prevent small bumps from showing up in the finish. Also keep in mind that when you move into metallics, imperfections become more visible and you may see something that doesn't look quite right to you. You may also feel compelled to go back a step or two in an effort to correct that. That kind of thing is perfectly fine. But when you're ready to move forward, the red tinting that I chose to go with for this project is called Duplicolor METALCAST Red. With this finish, I would like to implore very much that you apply this finish modestly. Take your time with applying it evenly. Remember that this is a translucent color, so the more an area is sprayed, the darker it will become. Now, after hand painting these lines and filling in the other areas that needed to be painted black, this is where I would normally stop and move on to visor install. But like I said, I wanted to produce a battle damaged and weathered look. To achieve an organic looking paint chip effect, I reapplied the METALCAST red onto select areas that I wanted to be chipped and then thoroughly wiped that area with a paper towel. For some reason, when you reapply METALCAST red onto itself, it causes the already dry coat to soften, allowing it to be wiped away without impacting the metallic paint underneath. Now, before moving forward with adding any additional details, I sprayed the helmet down with some gloss clear coat. This is meant to provide an extra layer of protection to the helmet before airbrushing on a few blast marks with some flat black acrylic paint. If I theoretically messed up spraying something and I wanted to start over again, acrylic is water soluble, so cleanup is easy. But having that extra layer of protection between a cloth and the paint underneath, it allows me to be able to wipe the surface more vigorously if needed. Now this is a detail that I added but very much have mixed feelings about, because yes, carbon scoring from blast marks would make sense, but mine came out looking cartoony and the edges weren't as blurred as they should have been. I did retry a few times, but to no avail was I able to achieve the effect that I was looking for. I didn't want to necessarily get rid of them either, because I did have my heart set on having these very jagged looking laser blast marks. So I sort of kept them in the final product, but I'll let the audience be the judge of the outcome if they care to do so. This next detail, however, is one that I appreciated much more than the previous one. I wanted to establish some kind of point of impact in the center of my blast marks, so with a Dremel I wallowed out some asymmetrical holes and followed up around the contour of the hole with 80 grit sandpaper. And after having added that additional layer of detail, my previously described insecurities began to fade. Following up from there, I wanted to further dirty up the helmet, so with the airbrush I lightly coated the helmet with more flat black acrylic asymmetrically in an effort to make the dirt/carbon placement look random. And then there was a pretty dramatic jump in progress from this clip to the next, but to fill you in, any areas that look severely melted were accomplished with a soldering iron by dragging it across the surface of the helmet. Then those areas were touched up with Testor's silver enamel, and then the contour of the indentions were lightly painted with Testor's gold enamel to give off a heat-stained look. Regarding the visor install, it was simply hot glued into place, but I'll have to go back just a tad bit to explain how I got to this point. I ended up using this polycarbonate grinding shield because I thought it being already curved would make installing it easier, but the plastic is not very flexible, so it made it much more difficult, explaining why I used a mountain of hot glue on the inside of the helmet. Not to mention that it required much more of an effort to cut out than when I make tinted visors for my Mandalorian helmets. I hope by the sheer fact of me having to cut one out with a Dremel cutting wheel illustrates just how tough that plastic actually is. It had very little flex to it, and didn't exactly match the contour of the surface that it was supposed to mate up with, but I still made it work. To achieve a metallic green tinted visor, I simply used static cling window film. To cut out the basic shape that I needed, I mated the window film with the visor cutout, and then I cut out the film with an X-Acto knife, using the edges of the visor as guides. Then after making some minor adjustments, I was able to move forward knowing that the window film would rest perfectly on the outside of the visor. Also, it's noteworthy enough to tell you to make sure that the outside surface of the visor is clean and free of any particulate that may potentially get trapped underneath of the window film. If that happens, then the film will bubble up around the particulate and easily show through. And that, my friends, wraps up this video, so if you truly enjoyed what you just watched, go ahead and give this video all of the love and praise that you think it deserves. I hope that you'll join me next time, and as always, thank you for watching.